Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Wild Wild West End, a podcast about Galveston County naturalism and wildlife. I'm your host, and since this is the pilot episode, I won't have a guest today. In this early stage of development, I'm really going to be trying out a few types of segments to see how things flow, what order is working best. I'm going to be working in a single take format, so there may be some imperfections due to that limitation. But just to move forward, again, I am your host, Greg Hall. Who am I is probably a question some of you have that are tuning into this podcast. Everyone is tuning in for the first time. So I'm a certified interpretive guide by the National Association of Interpretation, and I'm a certified zoo and aquarium science professional. I am also the Habitat and Stewardship Coordinator for the Artist Boat Coastal Heritage Preserve. That is my I'm going to say day job, but it's kind of a full-time job. So I'm working from home sometimes now due to the COVID-19 outbreak. So I'm going to get into that a little bit more in a minute. But basically, who am I? I spent better than 18 years in food service, working for my family business in restaurants and occasionally in other restaurants as part-time jobs. I was always something of a weekend warrior with my citizen science and naturalism. I'm a herpetoculturist, so I keep many reptiles and amphibians here at home that I use in presentations and animal outreach. So animal outreach is kind of how I got out of the restaurant business. And I also spent 6 years in wholesale, mixed in there with my restaurant career. And in my 20s, I kind of took a break from everything, including herpetoculture. But then in my early 30s, kind of got back into all of it. I am an avid outdoorsman. I was raised by an outdoorsman and a hunter. I don't hunt myself, but I did when I was considerably younger. As far as herpetoculture goes, I probably have the neighborhood of 30 snakes here at home. And I also have, I think, 14 or 15 turtles. I have some lizards. I have a salamander. I have a couple of frogs. I'm kind of all over the place with that. And most of these animals are, like I said, animals I use in outreach. The way that I got out of the food service industry was I've always been really big on self-study. I've constantly educated myself throughout my life. I didn't have the opportunity to attend college for what I probably would have preferred to have done. I do have an associate's degree in computer systems occupational technology, but I don't find myself using a lot of that in my daily life anymore. It's good to have some proficiency with computers nowadays, of course, and I do. So other than that, it's mostly been self-education. I didn't get these other certifications until fairly recently in the grand scheme of things. Like I became a certified interpretive guide last year, and I also received my certification in zoo and aquarium science last year. So you could say that I've kind of been an unrecognized, educated person on the subject matter. I'm also an avid birder. That didn't start until about 4 years ago. I really owe that to my wonderful fiance, Laura Hafferty. She was the one that, we used to drive around looking for snakes, and she was wanting to look at the birds. I found myself more and more looking at the birds. And then I met my good friend, Romy Swanson, who fully indoctrinated me into the world of birding, past just simple casual birding out of a car window. He kind of said one day, when there's not snakes around in the wintertime, there's still lots of birds. It gives you something to do. So, I took that to heart, and we started birding some when he was in the area from Austin. I'm in Galveston, by the way. So then he introduced me to Kyle O'Haver, who's the assistant director of Galveston Island State Park, who is also an avid birder and a very talented birder, I might add. And he became one of my birding mentors, started birding with him a lot. I learned a lot of what I know from Kyle. Another mentor to me has been Jim Stevenson, a noted ornithologist here on Galveston Island. He and I met because of herpetology. He is also a herbs guy. He really loves snakes. he honestly probably knows more about has forgotten more about herpetology than I know today. And he has a more broad understanding. I'm kind of specialized in snakes. I mean, I know a lot about the others too, but I'm really specialized in snakes, and so is Jim. But he has a broad understanding of the taxonomy of salamanders, frogs, turtles, lizards, and that's something that I kind of lack. I know some of it, but not all of it. Snakes are really my area. Another mentor that I have is, a friend of mine, Richard Liebler. He may not consider himself my mentor, but I very much consider him my mentor. He has and continues to teach me a lot about birding. So, that's just to mention a few people who are important in my birding life. And for those mentorships, it's important for me to have some knowledge to use as currency for that exchange. So I try to teach them what I can about herps when they're receptive to that. And, in a nutshell, that's where I'm at right now. So I mentioned I got out of the restaurant business through my presentations. I did that by volunteering. I started out volunteering, doing presentations for Boy Scouts of America, Texas Master Naturalists, Audubon Tern, other small groups. And then I got a request to do a presentation for Artist Boat, which is my current employer. At the time, I didn't know much about Artist Boat. I just knew that they had some venomous snakes on their property. They wanted to teach their employees basic safety around those snakes and how to ID the snakes they might encounter here in Southeast Texas, specifically on the west end of Galveston Island. So I went and I did a presentation, was very successful. At that presentation, I met Mary Warwick, who was the one who set it all up. Fast forward a few months, and Mary would be hiring me to go to work for Artist Boat as the coordinator for the preserve, which in that role, I coordinate the volunteer work. I'm also the safety officer. I do some educational teaching out there at the preserve and, at schools and elsewhere. I'm in charge of the habitat restoration project and many other things on the preserve. So that's where I'm at. So that's just to tell you a little about who I am. I've been working in the conservation field for a little over 2 years now. Best decision I ever made. I was really enabled to do that by my fiance, who encouraged me to do something with myself other than work in restaurants. So I'm really glad that happened. It's been a life-changing event, and I plan to continue working in conservation for the rest of my life or till I retire, whichever comes first. I have a feeling it'll be for the rest of my life. So why this podcast and why now is a question I wanted to put out there and answer. So I have a lot of knowledge that I've picked up in my life about the local ecosystems, coastal prairies, the wildlife that resides in these various habitats around the upper Texas coast. That's all been self-education for the most part, and I kind of want to put that knowledge out there. I've been interested in podcasting for a while now. I've always thought that I might want to try my hand at it, and with the recent outbreak of COVID-19, I find myself working from home a lot of the time. So I kind of wanted to breach this world, get into podcasting, see what I could do with it. I'm actually planning a podcast with another friend of mine, Romy Swanson, who I mentioned is one of my mentors. We are kicking around some plans right now, but I really wanted to do this just to give myself a leg up, learn the ins and outs of it, of recording, of narration, of building segments. So this podcast for me is, am I serious about it? Yes, but in a way it's practice for a larger project. I don't know that this one will go away, to be clear. I think I'll probably continue to do my own thing while I combine, join forces with Romy. And we talk about some things we've done together and separately and just other general topics. So, as I mentioned, I'm an avid birder, and am I an expert on birds? Some people might think so, but that really wouldn't be the full truth. I know some real experts on birds, and I'm very knowledgeable about birds in a general sense, but there are actual ornithologists and people that study bird migration who really are way better at that than I am. In my limited way, I'm going to try to pass on some knowledge to you about spring migration, which is, it's happening now. So with that in mind, I'm going to move forward and I'm going to talk about spring migration. So I'm going to step back and talk about a couple of birds that their migration started to happen in January, which is really the beginning of spring migration. It's really very few birds that there's movement going on in January. One of them is the Bonaparte's gull, which generally shows up a little after the first of the year here in Galveston. Another thing that happens is we start seeing flocking white ibis. So you can look for those two things in January. Now, the third bird that in question here is, I actually had questions about this because I haven't been birding as long as some people. And since I've been birding, there have been mottled ducks and, on the west end of Galveston Island pretty much year round. And I'm looking at, the Galveston Ornithological Society chart on bird migration, and I noticed that the mottled duck migration is mentioned in January. So I called Jim, talked to him about that, and he said that previous to 2 years ago, it was really hard to find a mottled duck in Galveston in the fall, that they migrated out and, came back in the spring. So that was a thing. And apparently now we have more and more mottled ducks residing in Galveston Island pretty much year round. What the cause of that is, we're really not sure. Suspected that it's climate change, but without evidence to back that up, I'm really hesitant to go out and say that I think that's what it is. Could just be increased conservation of habitat out here or lack of habitat other places. It could be a lot of things. So late January, early February is when we start to see the purple martins show up here. And, one day you might see 50, one day you might see 100, one day you might see 500 as they pass over. And then we have some that, they stay here and reside here through the spring. So that's late January, early February. Now into February, we start to see the movement of American bitterns and American crows, reddish egrets, red-winged blackbirds. Again, some of those birds seem to be residents here on the island year-round, with the exception of American crows, which very rarely visit the island. They're more of a mainland bird on the upper Texas coast. But some of these other species that seem to be resident year-round here, their populations are augmented during this time by an influx of birds from other places. Around the end of February, beginning of March, we start to see the ruby-throated hummingbird migration start, and they start to appear all over the island. Anywhere that there's there's food, you'll find ruby-throated hummingbirds. So then more into March, we start to see the beginning of the whimbrels showing up, common terns, gull-billed terns, black terns, barn swallows, eastern kingbirds, chimney swifts, cliff swallows, yellow-crowned night herons, least terns, lesser yellowlegs, eastern willets. Lots of birds in March. March is really the beginning of the heavy spring migration. So late March, early April, we start to see the big flocks of American avocets and their breeding plumage, which is really beautiful. I was out with my friend Richard Liebler last week, and we saw a flock of what must have been 5,000 of them. They were just beautiful, and there were so many of them, you just could not believe it. So white-faced ibis also start to show up late March, early April. Oops, sorry about that. Then on into April, the ruby-crowned kinglets are having some movement. We have a lot here now already. Scissortail flycatchers, they've already shown up here in late March. The bulk of them will show up in April, though, along with other birds such as Tennessee warblers, merlins, red knots, painted buntings, common nighthawks, and we'll see a limited amount of lesser nighthawks here too. Great crested flycatcher, saw my first one today here in late March. More of them will start to show up in April. Savannah sparrows will begin to depart. We have lots of them here now, but their numbers will start to drop. Red-eyed vireos will be showing up. Black-crowned night herons, I've already seen some, but we'll get more. Roseate spoonbills, their populations will be augmented. Caspian terns, Hudsonian godwits will be here for a very limited time. Western sandpipers, little blue herons, warbling vireos. April is another really big month in the spring migration, and birders just love it. Now, May is yet another big month where we have a lot of movement among green herons, least sandpipers, Forster's terns, bowtail grackles, white rump sandpipers, American redstarts, tricolored herons, Franklin's gulls, blackneck stilts, which have already begun to arrive, black-throated green warblers, marbled godwits, Wilson's phalaropes. We will see the brown pelican population augmented. And then in May, a really coveted bird, the bobolink, will sometimes show up on Galveston Island. Some years we get one or two. Last year we had flocks of 28, 30 on the Coastal Heritage Preserve, which was a great year for bobolinks here. Black skimmer movement, American oyster catcher, and magnificent frigate birds, which are really a joy to see on those windy days when they come over land. Now, things really start to slow down after May. June and July, we really only have major movement with 9 species of birds: lesser yellowlegs, sanderlings, royal terns, herring gulls, short-billed dowitchers, northern mockingbirds, western sandpipers, greater yellowlegs, least sandpipers. At this point, we're getting firmly into summer, so I'm just going to stop there with the species. But I had another conversation about a particular bird with Jim today, and that was the northern mockingbird. And I just had questions about it because 365 days a year I can find a northern mockingbird here on Galveston Island. So I had him explain it to me, and he introduced me to species augmentations, which is basically where the juvenile birds show up and begin to mature here, and some of the adult birds leave. The population here becomes augmented and grows, and basically the northern mockingbirds we have here today aren't necessarily the northern mockingbirds we have here tomorrow, but we will always have northern mockingbirds here. And he mentioned that he said what he called it was the northern mockingbirds that are showing up now are speaking Spanish. And by that, he meant they are mimicking Mexican, South American birds right now. When they first show up, they'll eventually transition into the local bird calls, but right now they're still mimicking the birds they have been used to hearing, which I thought was a pretty cool thing, pretty interesting bit of trivia there. So I liked it. I've been doing a limited amount of birding. As mentioned, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 thing here. I've been socially distancing. I've just been hanging around with the same couple of birders, and we stay well distanced when we go out together. And we're just trying to stay out in the middle of nowhere and bird away from other people. Done a lot of birding with Richard, done some birding with my friend Bob Becker, and it's been a pretty good spring so far. We got a little gull on the Bolivar Peninsula off Bob Road, which was really neat. Richard and I got it. Some people have dipped on that bird and not found it, but a handful of other people, the reliable people, have seen the bird. There was a report of a king eider on the Bolivar Peninsula, same area, right there at what used to be Rollover Pass. Unfortunately, it appears that bird was misidentified and was actually a Muscovy, domestic Muscovy drake. Accidents happen. It just, a guy that was not familiar with the Muscovy reported it. I wasn't there. Maybe he saw a king eider, maybe he didn't. I have no idea. I know that we carefully followed the instructions of where this bird would be flying up and down the peninsula, and what we observed was a Muscovy drake flying up and down the peninsula right along that track, kind of on the same schedule that the king eider was supposed to be there on. So that was a vagrant bird that we didn't get because I don't think it was there. Other good birds, got, as I mentioned, first great crested flycatcher popped up today at Lafitte's Cove, which I'm going to talk about Lafitte's Cove in a little bit here. Um, a female magnolia warbler, which was kind of early, showed up there today. I'm pretty sure I saw the bird. Was not able to identify it though. It was a really quick look. Some other people saw it, said that's what it was. Bob says he got pictures of it. So I'm just going to go ahead and believe that that was a female magnolia warbler that I saw. Spent the evening yesterday with the number one eBirder in Galveston County, Dennis Cook, and with a good friend of mine, Bob Becker, who's also an avid birder and photographer. And we went out to see some barn owls that I knew, well, I thought it was a barn owl. There ended up being two barn owls show up. We didn't get them in close enough to really get good photos, but we did see the birds, and that was neat. Barn owls are a really cool bird. So that is just a little bit about what to expect, and now a month or two before now, and in the coming months as far as spring migration goes. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 outbreak, the big birding events that we all look forward to here every year have all been canceled or postponed. Featherfest, which I know that Julianne Brown and her people over at the Galveston Island Nature Tourism Council really work hard for that, and unfortunately, it is off this year. It's not going to happen. The Great Texas Birding Classic has been postponed until fall, so there will be no big sits, no big days. All of those tournaments we look forward to are just not going to happen until an undetermined date in the fall. That's unfortunate, but we're all trying to do our part just to minimize the damage from this outbreak. So please, everybody that's going out birding, use good common sense, practice social distancing, listen to what the CDC tells you to do and do it. And let's just try to make the best of this thing. Maybe bird your backyard a little bit more. I don't know what the solution is, but I know that all of us becoming disease vectors isn't the solution. So anyway, that's a little bit about spring migration and what to expect. Like I said, one of the things I wanted to do with this podcast is highlight some really interesting media, specifically books. I'm going to highlight a book now and review it. This book, I have it right here in front of me, was written by one of my birding mentors, Jim Stevenson, noted ornithologist, director of the Galveston Ornithological Society, which I'm a proud member of. This is a great book. Not only is it instructional on how to identify different types of birds, but the photos are outstanding in it. Jim's written a number of books that I've read. Wildlife of North Florida, Wildlife of Galveston, Beyond the Classroom. He was a teacher in Florida, I believe Tallahassee, but before coming here years ago to study bird migration on the upper Texas coast. And I'm glad he did. Ended up great. He's one of my best friends and we get along really good. He writes high quality material. And as I mentioned, his photographs are excellent. Exceptional photographer. So as I mentioned, the book is not only instructional in scientific terms and identification terms. It's not truly a field guide per se, but it has a lot of that characteristics of one. The photos, I'll say again, are excellent. It's more of a journey through photos in my eyes, and that is the way it differs from his other books. This is the best book he has written, although I believe that he will top it with the book he's writing now. So look for that in the future. Jim is writing another book on coastal birds. So I am eagerly anticipating it and recommending that you pick up Bird Life of Galveston. You can get this book from Jim for $40. The only con about this is that if you want to buy this book online, say on Amazon, quantities are pretty limited. You're going to pay about $70 for this book. Is it worth that? It is worth that. You can pick up a used copy for probably $50, $60, or you can make the drive over to Jim and pick that up from him for $40, or go to one of his presentations in which he sells those books for $40 at his presentations. He is a presenter occasionally for the Galveston Audubon Group. So that is one way you could run into him and get that book. Another way is to simply contact him via email. You can look him up online, look up the Galveston Ornithological Society. He is the director. He's the only point of contact with the GOS. So it won't be hard to get in touch with him if you want to buy BirdLife of Galveston. So that is my book review of the BirdLife of Galveston. Fabulous book. Check it out. So birding hotspots of the Upper Texas coast. I figured that each episode of my podcast, I would highlight one place that either I like to go or other birders like to go and are successful going there and finding good species of birds, So Lafitte's Cove is to Galveston Island as Smith Oaks is to High Island. It's the absolute epicenter of the birding universe on Galveston Island. Everybody visits it. Some of us that are a little more fanatical about our bird listing go to Lafitte's Cove year round. Other people are simply spring birders and photographers. They only come during the heat of spring migration to get their really good shots of these birds and see these birds for the year. Both types of birders are more than welcome there. It's a comfortable place. It's nestled into the Lafitte's Cove subdivision on the west end of Galveston Island. So exact address, I'm not sure of. You can easily Google the Lafitte's Cove Nature Preserve and get, GPS coordinates to go there. For those who don't care to do that, if you're heading west on Stewart Road on Galveston Island, when you pass Spanish Grant and pass Settegas Road, you will see the Lafitte's Cove subdivision on your right-hand side. You will pass the first entrance and enter the subdivision at Eckert Drive. Just a little ways down, you will see the parking for the nature preserve and a boardwalk, a really nice boardwalk heading out over the water, going into the preserve. So that's where you'll park. The only con of Lafitte's Cove is that there are no restrooms there, not even a porta potty. So the closest place that has a porta potty is actually Hummel's General Store off 3005, pretty nearby, like a 2-3 minute drive from Lafitte's Cove Nature Preserve. I like Lafitte's Cove year round. I sometimes go there at night. It doesn't close. I'll go in there at night and, see snakes and frogs and do night photography there, listen to the night birds, check out the owls. You can see barn owls there as well as great horned owls. So I really like that about it. You can catch a number of different herps in Lafitte's Cove, Rio Grande chirping frogs, Gulf Coast toads, green and squirrel tree frogs. Into the summer, you'll start to find eastern narrowmouth toads. You can locate them easily by call. There are speckled king snakes there. There are rough earth snakes and DeKay's brown snakes there. Coach whips, definitely cottonmouths. So do watch your step. They are a plentiful snake in the area. Actually, I'm going to talk a lot about cottonmouths in a little while here in my species profile, but for now, I'll just say that, anywhere on the west end of Galveston Island, you should watch your step for venomous snakes. Both western diamondback rattlesnakes and cottonmouths are plentiful in the right habitat out there. So please go enjoy Lafitte's Cove. Again, practice social distancing when you do so. Love the place. Really cut my teeth as a birder at Lafitte's Cove, and I'll probably still be going to Lafitte's Cove up until the day I die. So really like the place. It's got freshwater habitat where you'll see all your water birds. Right time of year, you got all kinds of ducks there. It's got one of the only areas of standing oaks and other native trees left on Galveston Island that is a fabulous migrant trap for all those spring warblers. So just, yeah, Lafitte's Cove, I give it an 8 out of 10, only that because there's no bathrooms. And other than that, it's great. So another thing I really wanted to do with this podcast is talk about naturalist gear and kind of review some of it. We all wear particular types of clothes, use particular types of tools and gear. You know, we have binoculars, spotting scopes. Us herpers have snake catching tools, hooks, tongs, buckets, bags. So today I'm going to talk about snake charmer hooks. I personally know Toby Joe Petty. So him and his wife Sherry run the Snake Charmer Hooks business. He makes wonderful hooks. I own two of them. So the main hook I use is actually an older Best Exotics hook. That's my mid-range hook. But his hook, his custom hooks occupy my heavy end and my light end in hooks. So what that means is the heavy end hook is something that I use to flip tin, to flip rocks, heavy objects. And absolutely, the model I use is the rock flipper. So it's a heavy hook. It's just indestructible. If you break it, I'd be proud of you. It has a mounted flashlight on it, which is great for night herping or seeing into those nooks and crannies in the rocks if you're out in West Texas. Really, it's just, to mount a flashlight on a hook was an innovative idea. I really like it. As far as the lighter end hook, my cage hook is actually a solid metal snake charmer hook. It's very lightweight and thin. It's primarily used to take medium and small size snakes in and out of cages in herpetoculture. I do use it occasionally in the field though as well. So it's very wide range of what you can use it for. It's also a very strong hook, even though it's lightweight. Again, you look up, you can find him on Facebook. You can call him, you can email him. He does custom work. I've seen a lot of the custom hooks that he's done for friends of mine. They're really nice. Again, I use the rock flipper and then I also use the cage hook. So super nice guy. I had an educational table next to him for a couple of years at the Herps Exotic Animal and Reptile Show, where I did education. And, you know, Toby's a real nice guy. So Toby Joe Petty, look him up. So I wanted to talk about one of my favorite snakes and one of everyone else's least favorite snakes. So I actually love Achistrodon piscivorus, the northern cottonmouth. I think they are fantastic animals. They are the undisputed master generalists. So you know, they pack a considerable venom. They will eat just about anything. So as Rossi, in his authoritative volume on North American or you know, the snakes of North America and Canada, what a great book. I'm not reviewing books anymore though. So anyway, he said in that book that it would take a book to list all the things that a cottonmouth will eat. They will eat it dead or alive. I actually own two cottonmouths. I have one that will absolutely eat anything you offer her, with the exception of another cottonmouth or a Texas coral snake. She will not eat either of those things. She will eat raw steak. She will eat raw chicken. She will eat cooked steak or chicken. She will eat small road-killed turtles. Just about anything you can imagine. I've offered this snake and it's eaten it. Her normal diet that I feed her is, you know, day or week-old chickens and rats, occasional fish, just to mix it up. These snakes, all right, so you hear a lot of stories that the cottonmouth is aggressive, that you can fall into a ball of breeding cottonmouths and 1,000 of them will bite you and kill you. These are solitary animals. You very rarely encounter more than one together, and then it's only usually during brumation or breeding season. So, and in breeding season, you're going to see like 2 or 3. You might see 2 battling males and a female, and they're not interested in you. They're never interested in you. They're one of the most cowardly snakes I've encountered. They talk a good game though. I mean, that defensive display is really good. That wide open, bright white mouth and rattling that tail. Interesting thing about that, you know, everybody thinks that, you know, they call snakes ground rattlers because they rattle their tails. Almost every snake in the New World will rattle its tail, venomous or not. Lots of snakes in the Old World also do this. in a phylogenetic sense, the closer you get to Crotalus, which are the true rattlesnakes, the faster that tail rattle becomes. So we're only a couple of steps away from rattlesnakes when you get to genus Echistrodon. So they have a pretty good, pretty well-developed fast tail rattle. Not like a rattlesnake, but also better than most snakes. And they use that. They'll rattle in those leaves to create a disturbance, to, I guess, warn you away, get your attention. Like I said, masters of the defensive display. Fairly intelligent snakes, I've noticed. I've actually been envenomated by a cottonmouth, one of the ones I own, unfortunately. Freak accident, don't recommend it. I didn't have a very bad bite, could have been much worse. I don't recommend working with venomous snakes unless you have a good reason. I don't know if a lot of people would consider the reason I do it a good reason, but I think education is a good reason. There's no substitute for the live animal at a presentation. I use these snakes for presentation and, just for general study, citizen science. I think they're fascinating. I always have. Since the first snakes I ever saw, which were rough earth snakes when I was probably 3-4 years old, I've been fascinated. So the venomous fascination didn't come till much later, but I probably caught my first copperhead when I was 8-9 years old. Genus Echistrodon I have a real soft spot for. So the genus Echistrodon, which the northern cottonmouth belongs to, there are only 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 6 snakes in that genus. There's the northern cottonmouth, Echistrodon piscivorus, and there is the Florida cottonmouth, Echistrodon conanti. Now, the rest of the snakes are collectively known as moccasins. So the North American moccasins would be those 2 species I mentioned, and the 2 species of copperhead, the broad-banded copperhead and Contortrix, the eastern copperhead. Now, south of the Rio Grande, you have 2 more members of the genus. You have the bilineal cantil, and you have Taylor's cantil. The cantils are, they look a lot like cottonmouths. They really do. So they're the South American moccasins. So that's just a little information about cottonmouths. A lot of people say they'll chase you. I could find 100 people who say they've witnessed it. But the thing is, we all carry a high quality video camera in our pocket nowadays, and for the last, 8-10 years, and nobody's filmed this. Nobody has any evidence that cottonmouths chase people. So my firm belief is that until I see some scientific evidence of that, it does not happen. Anyway, cottonmouths, really cool snakes. As long as you leave them alone, they're definitely going to leave you alone. I am going to move on and talk a little bit about Artist Boat, which is the company I work for. We are a small nonprofit. This segment is one that I'm going to recognize local conservation organizations. Artist Boat has conserved around 700 acres at the Coastal Heritage Preserve. The end goal is 1,400 acres. We do a lot of really good work there. You can look us up at www.artistboat.org and see everything that we do. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it here. I just want to recognize that this organization is here. Go see what they do. If you feel like it's something that you like, please donate. All small nonprofits really need donations, so they have unrestricted dollars so we can pay salaries, pay bills, pay for vehicles, pay for gas, all those things we really need money for. So a time like now in the COVID-19 outbreak, when we rely so heavily on public interaction, this really hurts. So please support Artist Boat if you take a look and like what they do. Another section I wanted to do is wildlife watching tips. So how to find rough green snakes. Now, you can find them by accident, or you can target them and find them reliably. So I am going to give you the second way, since the first way we all know is just to drive down the road and wait till you see one, shoot across the road, or find a dead one. This was actually all taught to me by Willie Huskinson, a friend of mine who's a herper. He lives up in Fort Worth and in Burleson, actually. He took me out one night and kind of showed me how to do this. You look for some specific plant life. First thing you want to have is either yaupon or privet of some type. Second, you want to find an area within there that has some access to fresh water and also is associated with some type of green briar or climbing vine. Once you fulfill those criteria, go out there at night, take you a decent flashlight, and start looking in the trees. They will stick out like a sore thumb. And these guys are the racers of the trees, so they're not easy to catch in the daylight when their camouflage is almost impenetrable. But if you come out there at night, they're asleep. Really easy to just pick them up and gently handle them and check them out. So please use that information to go out and see a harmless insectivorous snake that your kids would probably love to see and you would probably love to see if you weren't so afraid of it. But there's nothing to be afraid of. There are no brilliantly green venomous snakes in North America. So if you find one, a brilliantly green snake, you can be assured it's completely harmless. Coastal Canine CPR is my fiance's business. She teaches a class called Pet Saver. It's an 8-hour class for $125. You learn all kinds of pet first aid, specifically canines, but also feline. You learn how to do CPR on them, general first aid. It's an 8-hour class for a real value of $125. She also offers some other courses that are much cheaper, some for kids. So go look her up on Facebook at Coastal Canine CPR, and please check out her business. And by all means, if you're a dog lover, you have kids that are going to be around your dogs, it'd be great if you took this class. So to wrap up, thanks for listening. This has been the Wild Wild West End. I hope that you have enjoyed it. I hope that you'll tune in for another episode. Bearing in mind that this was the pilot episode, you're likely to see some changes in the other episodes. You can contact me via Facebook at Greg Hall if you have suggestions on things I should talk about, or if you have questions about anything I've talked about. So everybody stay safe, socially distance, and tune in for my next episode. Thanks for listening.